Avery has always existed in the periphery of her own family. As the eldest child, her childhood was a stark contrast to that of her pampered younger sister, Luna. While Luna enjoyed every luxury and whim, Avery was the silent workhorse, burdened with endless household chores, holding down a demanding part-time job to contribute to family expenses, and constantly pressured to be understanding and give in to Luna's desires. She felt like an invisible servant, a ghost moving through a home that was never truly hers, constantly yearning for a fleeting moment of recognition or affection from her parents, who seemed to see only Luna. The fragile illusion of family shattered completely on Avery's 18th birthday. Instead of celebration, she returned home to an empty house, a curt note from her parents informing them they'd gone on a lavish vacation with Luna, and a lengthy, demanding list of chores for her to complete in their absence. The crushing betrayal and indifference solidified her growing despair. However, this rock bottom became her turning point. A visit from her Aunt Saris, a long-estranged relative who had observed the family dynamics with growing concern, brought a shocking revelation. Aunt Saris disclosed that Avery's beloved grandmother had left a substantial educational trust fund specifically for Avery's future. This fund, meant to secure her higher education and independence, had been systematically plundered by her parents over the years, not for family emergencies, but to fuel Luna's extravagant lifestyle and their own comforts. The truth hit Avery with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just neglected, she was exploited, a convenient ATM and unpaid laborer, never truly regarded as their child, but merely a tool. The realization ignited a cold, burning resolve within Avery. With nothing left to lose and her future stolen, she decided to reclaim it herself. She packed a small bag with her most essential belongings, leaving behind the house and the family that had suffocated her for 18 years. There was no dramatic confrontation, only a quiet, firm departure, severing ties with the emotional shackles that bound her. Homeless but resolute, Avery channeled her fury and newfound clarity into securing a future entirely on her own terms. She relentlessly applied for scholarships, her exemplary academic record and compelling essay topic earning her a full scholarship to a reputable university far from her hometown. She embraced her independence, excelling in her studies, forging genuine friendships, and discovering passions she never knew she had. The painful process of completely cutting off contact with her former family, blocking numbers, ignoring attempts at reconciliation, was difficult, but each step solidified her journey of self-liberation. The Shadow's Inheritance chronicles Avery's profound transformation from an unseen, exploited daughter into a formidable, self-possessed young woman. It is a powerful story of betrayal and resilience, of a stolen legacy leading to a chosen path, and of finding one's true self beyond the shadows of a dysfunctional family. Avery learns that while her inheritance was stolen, her true legacy is the life she bravely builds for herself. The scent of lemon polish and stale coffee grounds was the perfume of my existence. It clung to my hair, settled into the pores of my hands, and seemed to follow me even when I left the house. At 5:30 a.m., the house on Sycamore Drive was a mausoleum of sleek, gray minimalism, silent and imposing. I moved through the kitchen with the practiced stealth of a ghost, my bare feet making no sound against the cold marble floors. This was my domain, though I owned none of it. The morning routine was a rigid choreography I had perfected by the time I was 12. First, the coffee maker, a complex chrome machine that hissed like an angry viper, had to be primed for my father. It had to be ready the moment his feet hit the bottom step of the staircase. Second, the fruit. Luna was currently on a holistic wellness kick, which meant her breakfast required a precise arrangement of dragon fruit, chia seeds, and organic almond butter. If the texture was off, the morning was ruined. If the morning was ruined, the blame fell on me. I sliced the vibrant pink flesh of the fruit, the knife rhythmically tapping against the cutting board. My own stomach gave a hollow, aching growl. I ignored it. I would eat the ends of the bread loaf or the bruised apple slices that didn't make the cut for Luna's bowl once they were gone. Today was different, though. Or at least the small, treacherous ember of hope burning in my chest insisted it should be. The calendar on the wall, filled with my mother's chaotic scrawl of social engagements and Luna's appointments, had a single blank square for today, May 14th. I was 18 today. It wasn't that I expected a car with a red bow or a diamond necklace like the one Luna got for her sweet 16. I wasn't delusional. I knew my place in the hierarchy of the Miller household. I was the eldest, the mistake, the practice run before they got it right with Luna. But 18 was a threshold. It was legal adulthood. It was the bridge between the suffocating childhood I'd endured and something else. Surely a dinner? A card? Acknowledgement that I had survived? The heavy thud of footsteps signaled my father's descent. He entered the kitchen, adjusting his cufflinks, his eyes scanning the room not for his daughter, but for his caffeine. "Pot's fresh," I said quietly, sliding a mug across the island toward him. He grunted, lifting the cup to his lips and taking a tentative sip. He didn't look at me. He looked through me, focused on the unseen stock tickers scrolling through his mind. "The garage door was sticking again last night, Avery. Did you call the repairman like I asked?" "Yes, Dad. He's coming on Thursday." "Make sure you're here to let him in. I don't want him wandering around the property unsupervised." "I have a double shift at the diner on Thursday. I told you that yesterday." He finally looked at me, a flicker of irritation marring his smooth, moisturized features. "Figure it out, Avery. That's what adults do. They figure it out." He took his coffee and retreated to his study, the door clicking shut, a definitive dismissal. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Happy birthday, Avery." "Thanks, Dad." 10 minutes later, the kitchen became a whirlwind of perfume and high-pitched anxiety as my mother and Luna swept in. Luna was radiant, even in her panic, her blonde hair cascading in perfect waves that I had spent an hour curling for her the night before. She was wearing a new silk sundress, the fabric shimmering like liquid water. "Mom, I can't find my passport," Luna wailed, tearing through the stack of mail on the counter, scattering envelopes onto the floor I had just swept. "It's in the safe, darling. Don't fret," my mother cooed, rushing to her side and stroking her arm. "Avery, go get your sister's passport from the study and bring the sunscreen from the master bath, the SPF 50, not the 30. I froze, the knife hovering over a strawberry. "Passport?" My mother turned to me, her expression shifting from maternal warmth to cool annoyance in a nanosecond. "Yes, passport. Move, Avery. We're on a tight schedule." "Where are you going?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, heavy with dread I couldn't articulate. "Cabo, obviously," Luna chimed in, snatching a piece of dragon fruit from the bowl I had prepared. She didn't say thank you. "God, Avery, do you ever listen? Mom and Dad are taking me for a pre-graduation de-stress week. My chakras are totally blocked from exam pressure." Luna was a junior. Her exams were multiple-choice quizzes she barely studied for. I was graduating in 2 weeks as valedictorian, balancing 4 AP classes and a 30-hour work week, and no one had mentioned my chakras. "You're leaving?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Today?" Flight leaves at 11, my mother said, checking her watch, which is why we need you to stop standing there like a statue and help us pack the car. The trunk isn't going to organize itself. I moved automatically, my body obeying the command while my mind reeled. They were leaving. On my birthday. They weren't just forgetting, they were actively abandoning the premises. I fetched the passport. I fetched the sunscreen. I hauled 3 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases down the stairs, the leather handles digging into my palms, while Luna complained that her phone charger cord was too short. I loaded the trunk of the SUV, arranging the luggage with Tetris-like precision to ensure nothing shifted. When the car was packed, they stood by the driver's side door. The sun was bright, blindingly so, casting long, sharp shadows against the driveway. "All right," my father said, patting his pockets. "House alarm is set. Don't forget the mail." My mother adjusted her sunglasses, looking at me. For a second, just a split second, I thought she remembered. I thought she saw the girl standing in faded jeans and a t-shirt that had been washed until it was nearly transparent. "There's a list on the counter. Since you'll be here alone, we figured it was a good time to get some of the deep cleaning done. The house has been looking a bit neglected lately." Neglected? The word hung in the air, thick with irony. "Have a good week, Avery," Luna called out from the back seat, already scrolling on her phone. "Don't go into my room." The engine roared to life. My father backed the car out of the driveway, the tires crunching over the gravel. I watched them go. I watched until the sleek black vehicle turned the corner and vanished, leaving nothing but the smell of exhaust and the chirping of birds in the manicured hedges. I stood there for a long time. The silence of the neighborhood pressed in on me. I was 18, I was an adult, and I was completely, utterly alone. The rest of the day was a blur of mechanical motion. I went to school, sat through lectures on calculus and European history, and nodded when people spoke to me. I didn't tell anyone it was my birthday. What was the point? It felt like a shameful secret, evidence of my own unlovability. If my own parents didn't care, why should anyone else? After school, I went straight to the diner. I worked the dinner rush, carrying heavy trays of burgers and shakes, forcing a smile for customers who treated me with more courtesy in 5 minutes than my family had in 5 years. The noise of the restaurant, the clatter of silverware, the sizzling of the grill, the hum of conversation was a comfort. It drowned out the thoughts circling in my head. When I clocked out at 9, my manager, a gruff woman named Brenda, handed me a small, slightly squashed brownie wrapped in plastic. "Happy birthday, kid," she grunted, not looking up at the register. "Saw the date on your file. Go home." It was the only kindness I had received all day. I held the brownie like it was made of gold, whispering a thank you that she waved off. The bus ride home was long and dark. By the time I walked up the driveway of Sycamore Drive, the house was a looming shadow against the night sky. It looked like a beast sleeping with one eye open. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The silence of the air hit me differently this time. In the morning, it had been the silence of anticipation. Now it was the silence of a tomb. The air conditioning was humming, chilling the sweat on my skin. I walked into the kitchen, dropping my backpack on the floor. I didn't turn on the main lights. The under-cabinet lighting cast a clinical, sterile glow over the countertops. And there it was, the list. My mother hadn't been lying. It sat on the center of the marble island, anchored by a heavy crystal vase. A sheet of cream-colored stationery covered in my mother's elegant looping cursive. I picked it up. My hand wasn't trembling. I felt a strange, cold numbness spreading through my limbs, a detachment that made me feel like I was watching myself from the ceiling. "Avery," the note began. "No dear, just the name. We will be back next Tuesday. While we are gone, please attend to the following. Do not disappoint us by leaving things half-finished. We expect the house to be spotless upon our return." I scanned the items. It wasn't a chore list. It was a punishment. 1. Deep clean all carpets. Rental steamer is in the garage. 2. Polish the silver set in the dining room buffet. 3. Wash all windows, inside and out. 4. Scrub the grout in the master bathroom shower with bleach. 5. Organize the pantry, toss anything expired. 6. Weed the entire perimeter of the garden. 7. Clean out the garage storage closet. The list went on. 20 items. 30. It was days of back-breaking labor. It was work for a professional cleaning crew, not a high school student with a job and finals approaching. And at the very bottom, a postscript scrawled in haste. P.S. Since you are working so much, we expect you to buy your own groceries this week. We cleared the fridge before we left so nothing would spoil. I looked up from the paper, staring at the stainless steel refrigerator. I walked over and pulled the handle. Empty. Shelves wiped clean. Not a carton of milk, not a stray egg, not even a bottle of ketchup. Just the stark white glare of the refrigerator light illuminating the emptiness. They had thrown everything out, or taken it. They hadn't left me a single crumb. I closed the refrigerator door. The soft thud echoed like a gunshot in the quiet house. Something inside me fractured. It wasn't a loud break. It wasn't a scream. It was a silent internal collapse. For 18 years, I had played the game. I had been the good daughter, the quiet one, the helpful one. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I sacrificed enough, if I made myself small enough to fit into the cracks of their lives, they would eventually see me. I thought that if I polished enough silver and scrubbed enough floors, I could earn my way into their hearts. I looked at the list again. Scrub the grout. Wash the windows. They didn't see a daughter. They didn't even see a human being. They saw an appliance, a Roomba that could drive itself to school, an ATM that dispensed labor instead of cash. They had gone to a tropical paradise to celebrate Luna's stress, and they had left me in an empty house with no food and a list of demands that would break my back. On my 18th birthday. The numbness began to recede, replaced with a heat that started in my stomach and rose up my throat. It wasn't sadness. I was done with sadness. Sadness was heavy. It dragged you down. This was lighter. This was volatile. It was rage. I looked at the beautiful, immaculate kitchen. I looked at the spot where I had stood this morning, cutting fruit for a sister who wouldn't even look at me. I looked at the coffee maker I cleaned every day for a father who spoke to me like an employee he was planning to fire. Happy birthday to me, I whispered into the darkness. I crumpled the list in my hand, the crisp paper crinkling sharply. I squeezed it until my knuckles turned white, until my fingernails bit into my palms. I sank down onto the cold floor, leaning my back against the cabinets. I pulled my knees to my chest, still clutching the balled-up list. I didn't cry. I had cried enough tears in this house to fill the swimming pool out back. Instead, I sat in the dark, feeling the pulse of the house around me. It was a beautiful house. It was a prison. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. I was waiting for them to love me. I was waiting for them to give me permission to exist. But they never would. To them, I was just a shadow, useful when needed, invisible when not. If I stayed here, if I did this list, if I kept playing this part, I would disappear completely. I would erode away until there was nothing left but a pair of hands scrubbing a floor. My gaze drifted to the window above the sink. My reflection stared back, ghostly, pale, eyes wide and dark. "You are 18, the reflection seemed to say. "You are free." But freedom required resources. It required money. It required a plan. I had the few $100s saved from the diner stashed in a sock in my drawer. I had my grades. I looked at the crumpled ball of paper in my fist. "Do not disappoint us," she had written. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Disappointment was the only inheritance they had ever given me. I stood up, my legs shaky but supporting me. I uncrumpled the list, smoothing it out on the counter with the palm of my hand. I stared at the elegant handwriting one last time. Then I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving the list there on the marble island. I climbed the stairs to my room, the smallest room, the guest room they had converted when Luna needed the master suite's adjoining room for her closet. I laid down on my bed, staring up at the ceiling. The hunger in my stomach was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot of resolve. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had left me here to rot and scrub and wait for their return like a faithful dog. But the girl they left behind was gone. The invisible daughter had vanished the moment she read that note. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I lay there in the dark, plotting. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was not going to scrub the grout. The silence of the house was not the peaceful kind. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. I sat at the kitchen island staring at the granite countertop, a luxury surface I spent hours polishing but was terrified to scratch. Next to my hand lay the list. 2 pages, single-spaced, handwritten in my mother's jagged, hasty scrawl. Number 1, deep clean the grout in the master bath. Number 2, organize the pantry by expiration date. Number 3, Luna left her silk blouses, hand wash and air dry only. It went on and on. My 18th birthday present was a sentence to solitary confinement with a mop and bucket while my family sipped mimosas in Cabo. The numbness I had felt an hour ago was beginning to curdle into a dull, throbbing ache behind my eyes. I traced the grain of the granite with a fingertip, wondering if I just stayed here, frozen, would I eventually turn to stone too? The doorbell shattered the stillness. I flinched, my knee hitting the underside of the island with a hollow thud. We weren't expecting anyone. The neighbors kept to themselves, and my parents had canceled the mail service for the week. I hesitated, half hoping whoever it was would realize the house was dark and leave. But the bell rang again, longer this time, insistent. I slid off the stool, my socks sliding on the hardwood I'd waxed yesterday, and walked down the hallway. The foyer was cold. It always was. When I opened the door, the late afternoon sun blinded me for a second. Standing on the porch, framed by the manicured hydrangeas I was responsible for watering, was a woman I hadn't seen in 5 years. Aunt Saris? My voice cracked, unused to speaking after hours of silence. She looked different than I remembered, yet exactly the same. Her hair was cut into a sharp, severe bob that framed a face etched with lines of worry, but her eyes were piercingly bright. She wore a trench coat that looked expensive and shoes that meant business. She wasn't smiling. "Avery," she said. It wasn't a question. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my frayed, oversized t-shirt and the exhaustion that must have been painted under my eyes. "May I come in?" I stepped back, confused. "Mom and Dad aren't here. They went away." "I know they aren't here," Saris said, stepping across the threshold. She brought the scent of rain and sandalwood with her, dispelling the sterile smell of lemon polish that permeated our home. "I saw the Facebook posts, family getaway, just the 3 of them, as usual." The bitterness in her tone surprised me. Saris was my father's sister, but they rarely spoke. I had always been told she was difficult and jealous of our family's success. She walked straight to the kitchen as if she owned the place, her heels clicking a sharp staccato rhythm on the floor. I hurried to catch up. Aunt Saris, why are you here? I asked, winging my hands. If they find out I had guests. Guests? She spun around, leaning her hip against the counter. Her eyes landed on the note, the list. She snatched it up before I could stop her. No, please, that's just... I started, reaching out, but she held it away, scanning the lines. Her jaw tightened. The paper crinkled in her grip. Hand wash Luna's blouses. She read aloud, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Scrub the patio. Avery, it is your 18th birthday. It's okay, I lied, the reflex automatic. They're busy. They need help maintaining the house. Luna has sensitive skin. She can't do the chemicals. Luna is 16 and perfectly capable of washing a spoon, Sarah snapped. She slammed the paper down onto the counter. Sit down, Avery. I have to get started on the grout. Sit down. The command was absolute. I sank onto the stool, my heart hammering. Saris wasn't looking at me with the disdain my parents usually reserved for me. She was looking at me with a terrifying mixture of pity and fury. She pulled the stool opposite me, sitting close enough that our knees almost touched. We need to talk about your grandmother, Avery. The name caused a pang in my chest. Nana had died 4 years ago. She was the only person who had ever brushed my hair without pulling it, the only one who snuck me chocolates when my mother put me on preventative diets while letting Luna eat cake. What about her? I whispered. We know she was wealthy, Avery, not comfortable like your parents pretend to be while leveraging credit cards. Wealthy. Saris took a breath, composing herself. When she passed, the bulk of her estate went to your father, but she carved out something specific, a trust, for you. I frowned. A trust? No, Dad said Nana died with nothing left. He said the nursing home took it all. That's why things are so tight. That's why I have to work at the diner to pay for my share of the groceries. Saris closed her eyes for a moment, looking pained. When she opened them, the fire was back. That is a lie. The world seemed to tilt slightly to the left. What? Mother left an educational trust specifically for you, $75,000. It was meant to unlock on your 18th birthday, today. It was meant to get you out of this house, to pay for tuition, housing, books, so you wouldn't be beholden to them. I stared at her. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to roar in my ears. $75,000. The number was abstract, impossible. It was freedom. It was a life where I didn't have to scrub floors until my hands bled. Where is it? I asked, my voice barely audible. How do I access it? Saris reached across the space and took my hands. Her skin was warm, her grip tight. Avery, that's why I'm here. I've been trying to get access to the accounts to check on them, fighting your father's lawyers for 2 years. I finally got the statements yesterday. She paused, and I saw tears welling in her eyes. It's gone. I didn't understand. Gone, like the market crashed? No, hissed Saris. Stolen, systematically drained. Your father was a custodian of the account until you turned 18. There were loopholes. Maintenance for the beneficiary, they called it. She let go of my hands to gesture wildly around the kitchen. Look around you, Avery. The new deck last summer, that was your tuition. Luna's new convertible, that was your dorm room. The trip to Cabo they are currently enjoying, that is the last of your legacy. I sat very still. I thought about the night Luna got the car, the big red bow, my parents beaming, telling her she deserved it for getting a B- in history. I remembered standing in the driveway, clapping, feeling guilty because I couldn't afford the gas to drive myself to the library. I thought about the family meetings where my father would sigh, rubbing his temples, telling me that money was so tight that if I really loved this family, I would pick up extra shifts at the diner to cover the electric bill. I had handed over my tips, crumpled 1s and 5s, stained with grease, feeling proud that I was helping. I was paying them to rob me. They They spent it on themselves? The question felt like vomiting. They spent it on Luna, Saris corrected, her voice hard, and on keeping up appearances. They used your grandmother's love for you to fund the lifestyle they couldn't afford, all while turning you into a live-in maid. But they're my parents, I said, the words tasting like ash. They wouldn't. Saris reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. She slid it across the granite. Bank transfers, dates, amounts. See for yourself. The transfer for the BMW dealership is right there, dated 2 days before Luna's birthday, drawn from Avery Educational Trust. I didn't want to look, but I did. I opened the folder. There it was, black and white, a ledger of betrayal. Withdrawal, $12,500, travel agency. Withdrawal, $4,200, luxury boutique. Withdrawal, $800, spa services. Date after date, year after year. While I wore hand-me-down shoes with holes in the soles, they were siphoning my future to buy silk blouses for Luna, blouses I was now ordered to hand wash. Something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud break. It wasn't a scream. It was a quiet, structural collapse. The foundation of be a good girl, work hard, and they love you in their own way, disintegrated into dust. They knew, I said. My voice sounded strange, flat, metallic. They knew today was my birthday. They knew the money was supposed to be mine today. That's why they left. They didn't want to face you, Saris confirmed. They thought if they were gone and left you with enough work to keep you exhausted, you wouldn't notice. Or maybe they think you're too beaten down to ask questions. She looked at me intently. Are you, Avery? I looked up from the papers. I looked at the chore list still sitting on the counter. Deep clean the grout. I wasn't a daughter to them. I wasn't a family member. I was an asset, a tool. I was a sponge to be squeezed until dry, then discarded in the corner until needed again. They hadn't just neglected me. They had cannibalized my life to feed their golden child. A coldness spread through my chest. It was freezing, sharper than the winter wind, but it wasn't fear. It was clarity. I gave them my paycheck last week, $200. Dad said they needed it for the water bill. He took it, put it in his wallet, and didn't even say thank you. Avery, you can stay with me, Saris offered, her voice softening. It's a small apartment in the city, but the couch is yours. We can get a lawyer. It will be hard, suing your parents, but—
No, I interrupted. Saris blinked. No? I don't want a lawyer. I don't want to spend the next 5 years in court fighting for money that's already spent. I stood up. The dizziness was gone. The exhaustion was gone. All that was left was a vibrating high-tension wire of resolve. Then what do you want? I looked around the kitchen. I saw the expensive espresso machine I wasn't allowed to touch. I saw the family photos on the fridge. Luna, Mom, Dad. I wasn't in a single one. I want out, I said. Sarah studied my face, searching for hesitation. She didn't find any. If you leave, if you cut them off, they will try to destroy you. They rely on you, Avery. They need their workhorse. When the workhorse runs, the masters get cruel. Let them, I said. The words felt heavy, final. I looked at the list one last time. I picked it up. The paper felt flimsy. They stole my money, I said, my eyes locking with Saris's. But they think they own my time. They think they own my guilt. I slowly crumpled the list into a tight, jagged ball. They're wrong. Sarah stood up, smoothing her trench coat. She looked at me with a newfound respect. I have a car outside. I can't take you with me right this second. I have a flight tonight for business. Bad timing, I know. But I can drop you somewhere. A shelter? A friend's? No, I said again. I needed to do this alone. If I went with Saris, I'd just be trading one guardian for another. I needed to prove to myself that I could survive without them. I needed to know that the air in my lungs was mine, and mine alone. I have some money saved, hidden, real money, not what I gave them. I'll be okay. It was a half-truth. I had a few $100s taped under my mattress, my escape fund. It wasn't enough for a life, but it was enough for a ticket. "You're sure?" Saris asked, though she looked like she already knew the answer. "I'm sure." "Good." She reached into her purse and pulled out a card. "If you ever need anything, if you change your mind, call me." She turned to the door, then paused. "Happy birthday, Avery. I'm sorry it wasn't the gift you deserved, but the truth, sometimes that's the most valuable thing we get." I watched her walk out. The door clicked shut, sealing the silence back inside. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was empty. And emptiness wasn't a burden. It was a blank canvas. I looked at the crumpled ball of paper in my hand, the lists of demands from the people who had plundered my existence. I walked over to the trash can, stepped on the pedal, and let it drop among the coffee grounds and eggshells. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their servant. I was leaving. The sound of Aunt Sarah's engine fading down the driveway felt like the last tether to sanity snapping, leaving me adrift in a silence so profound it made my ears ring. I stood in the hallway, the polished hardwood floor cold beneath my socks, clutching the edge of the entryway table until my knuckles turned the color of old bone. Stolen. The word didn't scream in my head. It echoed, hollow and final, like a stone dropped down a dried-up well. 18 years of scraping by, of wearing threadbare jeans and apologizing for existing, while a fortune with my name on it had been siphoned off to pay for Luna's riding lessons, Luna's designer wardrobe, and my parents' endless stress relief vacations. They hadn't just neglected me, they had consumed me. I was the fuel they burned to keep their perfect, shiny life warm. I looked up the staircase. The banister gleamed, smelling faintly of lemon oil, the scent of my own labor. I had polished it 3 days ago, right before they left for Cabo. The house was a museum of my servitude, every surface a testament of hours I had spent on my knees, scrubbing, wiping, and making myself invisible. A strange calmness settled over me. It wasn't peace, it was the absolute zero of emotional detachment. The fear that usually governed my life, the fear of upsetting Mom, of disappointing Dad, of making Luna cry, evaporated. You can't be afraid of losing something you never actually had. I turned and walked to my room. It was on the ground floor, a converted study off the kitchen that was always 5 degrees colder than the rest of the house. I pushed the door open. It didn't creak because I kept the hinges oiled, because noise attracted attention, and attention was never good. The room was sparse. A twin bed, a second-hand desk, and a narrow wardrobe. It looked like a guest room in a budget motel, devoid of personality. I realized with a jolt that I had subconsciously kept it this way. I had been living with one foot out the door since I was a child, waiting for permission to leave. I pulled my old backpack from under the bed. It was frayed at the straps, a relic from middle school that Luna would have thrown in the trash years ago. I unzipped it, the sound harsh in the quiet room. Essentials only, no sentimentality. I opened the wardrobe. My clothes were a sea of grays, navies, and blacks, utilitarian, designed to blend into the background. I grabbed 2 pairs of jeans, the ones that didn't have holes in the knees, and 3 t-shirts. I rolled them tight, military style, just as I had learned from a YouTube video on maximizing space. I packed my heavy hoodie, the one I wore when the heating was turned down low to save money, money that I now knew was never actually tight. I went to the desk. In the bottom drawer, taped to the underside, was an envelope.
I peeled it off, the adhesive ripping slightly. Inside was $412. It was my secret stockpile, skimmed from tips at the diner and odd jobs I did for neighbors when my parents weren't looking. It was supposed to be for textbooks. Now it was my survival fund. Next to the envelope lay my sketchbook. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the worn cover. It was filled with drawings of places I had never been, cityscapes, mountains, faces of strangers on the bus. It was the only thing in this house that contained my soul. If I took it, I was taking a piece of the vulnerability I wanted to leave behind. I gritted my teeth and shoved the sketchbook into the bag, pressing it flat against the back panel. I couldn't afford to be completely practical. I needed something to remind me I was human. I moved to the bathroom attached to the kitchen, the service bathroom, as Dad jokingly called it. I swept my toothbrush, a bar of soap, and a half-empty bottle of generic shampoo into a plastic bag. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger. Her eyes were dark, rimmed with exhaustion, but the set of her jaw was terrifying. She looked like someone capable of burning the world down. "You're not burning anything," I whispered to the reflection. My voice sounded rusty. "You're just disappearing." I returned to the room and zipped the bag. It wasn't heavy physically, but it felt leaden with implication. Once I walked out with this, there was no coming back. There would be no frantic phone calls, no "we were so worried." There would only be anger that the servant had quit without notice. I walked back out into the kitchen. The stainless steel appliances hummed their expensive electric song. On the oversized double-door refrigerator, the magnet-held note from my mother still fluttered slightly from the air conditioning. Avery. 1. Deep clean the oven. Use the heavy-duty cleaner. 2. Luna needs her winter coats dry cleaned before we get back. 3. The gutters on the north side look clogged. Don't forget to water the orchids. If they die, it's coming out of your paycheck. Mom. I stared at the looping, cursive handwriting. It was so casual in its cruelty, coming out of your paycheck. The paycheck I earned working 20 hours a week on top of school, which I then handed over to them for rent and utilities. I reached for the note. My fingers twitched, itching to rip it into confetti, to leave the shreds scattered over the pristine tile like snow. I stopped. Ripping it up was an act of passion. It required energy. It signaled that I cared about their demands. I pulled my hand back. I left the note exactly where it was. Let them come home to the silence. Let them walk into a kitchen that smelled of nothing but stale air, to find the oven dirty and the orchids withered. Let them find the void where I used to be. That was a louder statement than any tantrum. I walked to the front door, the backpack straps digging into my shoulders. The house felt massive around me, a cavernous beast holding its breath. I passed the living room with its white couches that I was never allowed to sit on. I passed the formal dining room where we ate Christmas dinner, and I spent the entire meal jumping up to refill water glasses in clear plates while Luna recounted her social calendar. I stopped at the entryway console. My key ring, a simple metal hoop with the house key and the back door key, felt hot in my palm. I placed the keys on the polished wood. Clink. The sound was tiny, microscopic against the vast silence of the suburb, but to me, it sounded like a gavel coming down. Guilty, I thought. Guilty of stealing my life. Sentence: abandonment. I reached for the brass doorknob. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. This was it, the threshold. Inside was misery, but it was a warm, fed misery. Outside was the night. Outside was homelessness. Outside was a world that didn't care if I lived or died. But outside was also mine. I turned the knob. The mechanism clicked smoothly. I pulled the heavy door open. The night air hit me instantly, humid, smelling of cut grass and approaching rain.
It was a stark contrast to the climate-controlled sterility of the house. I stepped out onto the porch. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, listening for the latch to catch. I didn't lock it. I couldn't. I had left the keys inside. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was leaving myself vulnerable to the world, but I was also ensuring I couldn't easily turn back. I walked down the steps, past the manicured hedges I had trimmed 2 weeks ago. My sneakers crunched on the gravel of the driveway. I kept my head down, shoulders hunched, not because I was ashamed, but because I felt like a fugitive. The neighborhood was asleep. Street lights cast long orange pools of light on the asphalt. In the windows of the neighboring houses, I saw the blue flicker of televisions, the silhouettes of families existing in their bubbles of normalcy. They had no idea that the girl from the big house on the corner, the quiet one who raked the leaves and brought in the mail, was walking into oblivion. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I froze. I pulled it out. A notification from Instagram. Luna had posted a story. My thumb hovered over the screen. It was masochistic, but I tapped it. The screen filled with a video. Luna, tanned and glowing, holding a tropical drink with a sparkler in it. My parents were behind her, laughing, clinking glasses. The caption read, "Living our best lives. Miss you, Avery. Not. Enjoy the chores, lol." I stared at the screen. The light from the phone illuminated the pavement at my feet. I looked at their smiles. I looked at the ocean behind them, an ocean paid for with the money Grandma intended for my tuition. I didn't feel the sting of tears. I felt the cold burn of rocket fuel. I went to the settings menu. I scrolled down to block contact. I tapped it for Luna, then for Mom, then for Dad. Then I powered the phone down completely. I slipped the black brick back into my pocket. The silence of the street seemed to welcome me now. The fear was still there, churning in my gut, gnawing at the edges of my resolve, but it was being drowned out by a new sensation. It was the feeling of weightlessness. I adjusted the straps of my backpack, looked down the long, empty road leading out of the subdivision, and took the first step. Left foot, right foot. I wasn't Avery the servant anymore. I wasn't Avery the ungrateful daughter. I was just Avery. And for the first time in 18 years, the direction I was walking was entirely up to me. The neon sign of the Starlight Motel flickered with a rhythmic, agitated buzz that seemed to synchronize with the anxious thrumming of my own heart. Buzz, click, darkness. Buzz, click, darkness. It cast a sickly pink hue across the cheap polyester bedspread where I sat, my knees pulled up to my chest. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial lemon cleaner, a combination that made my stomach turn, though perhaps that was just the hunger gnawing at my ribs. I stared at my phone, lying face up on the scratched laminate nightstand. It vibrated again, skating an inch across the surface. Mother. It was the 15th call in 2 hours. Before that, it had been father, and before that, a flurry of texts from Luna, ranging from confused question marks to demanding paragraphs about where her favorite sweater was. I hadn't read them. I watched the screen light up, illuminating the cracks in the ceiling plaster, and for the first time in my life, I didn't reach for it. I didn't answer the summons. I let it ring until the screen went black. Then, with a trembling hand, I powered the device off completely. The silence that rushed into the room was heavier than the noise, thick with the terrifying reality of what I had done. I was 18. I had $300 in cash, secreted away from odd jobs and birthday money I'd hidden in hollowed-out books, and I was entirely alone. But as I looked around the dingy room, taking in the peeling wallpaper and the water-stained carpet, I didn't feel the crushing weight of the chores that usually awaited me.
There was no list. There were no demands. The air was stale, but it was mine to breathe. The next morning, the sun didn't rise so much as the gray sky just grew lighter. I washed my face in the tiny chipped sink, staring at the reflection that looked back. Dark circles bruised the skin under my eyes, but there was a set to my jaw I hadn't seen before. The fear was there, coiling in my gut like a cold snake, but it was being devoured by a hotter, sharper sensation: fury. Aunt Sarah's revelation about the stolen trust fund burned in my chest. They hadn't just neglected me, they had cannibalized my future to feed their present. That anger became my fuel. It woke me up when the fatigue of sleeping on a lumpy mattress tried to drag me down. It kept my back straight when I walked into the public library 2 blocks away, my backpack heavy with everything I owned. The library became my headquarters. It smelled of old paper, dust, and the faint metallic scent of the heating vents. I staked a claim on a computer terminal in the back corner, far away from the prying eyes of the librarians. University of Washington, I whispered, typing the search query. Scholarships, financial aid, merit-based grants. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I had the grades, straight A's earned in the late hours of the night after the house was scrubbed clean. I had the extracurriculars, squeezed in during lunch breaks. What I needed now was money. I spent 6 hours that first day filling out forms. My eyes burned from the glare of the monitor. The most difficult part wasn't the data entry, it was the essays. Describe a significant challenge you have overcome. I stared at the blinking cursor. How could I summarize 18 years of invisibility? How could I explain the theft of my legacy without sounding like a bitter child? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began to type. I didn't write about a victim. I wrote about a manager. I wrote about managing a household, balancing budgets that weren't mine, navigating the complex emotional landscape of narcissism, and maintaining a 4.0 GPA while doing it. I poured the rage into the keyboard, but I refined it into steel. I wrote about resilience not as a buzzword, but as a survival tactic. By the time I hit submit on the 5th application, my shoulders ached, but a strange sense of satisfaction settled over me. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I was demanding a seat at the table. Survival in the interim was a blur of grease and fake smiles. I picked up shifts at a 24-hour diner near the highway, a place where the truckers didn't care that my uniform was slightly too big or that I looked exhausted. "More coffee, hun?" I asked a regular, a man with grease under his fingernails and a kind face. "You look like you need it more than I do," he chuckled, sliding a $5 bill across the counter. "Rough night?" "Just a long one," I said, forcing the corners of my mouth up. The heat of the kitchen was stifling, smelling of frying bacon and burnt toast. My feet throbbed in my cheap sneakers. Every plate I carried, every table I wiped, I calculated the cost. This shift pays for 3 nights at the motel. This tip buys dinner. I was tired, bone-deep, soul-weary tired. But every time I thought about calling home, begging for forgiveness, returning to the comfort of my own bed, I remembered the empty account. I remembered the vacation photos they posted while I was scrubbing floors. And I poured another cup of coffee. 3 weeks later, the email came. I was at the library, the hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. My inbox pinged. It was an invitation for an interview with the alumni committee for the prestigious Regent Scholarship at a university 3 states away. It was a full ride: tuition, room, board, and a stipend. It was my exit strategy. The interview was held in a rented conference room at a high-end hotel downtown. I wore my only suit, a charcoal gray ensemble I'd bought from a thrift store and tailored myself in the motel room with a needle and thread. I smoothed the lapel, checking my reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors. Avery Miller? The voice belonged to a woman with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses perched on the end of her nose. She sat at a mahogany table alongside two men in expensive suits. The room smelled of rich coffee and leather. "Yes, ma'am," I said, extending my hand. My palm was dry, my grip firm. "Thank you for seeing me." "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite them. "I'm Dr. Aris. This is Mr. Cohen and Mr. Wright. We were quite moved by your essay." Mr. Cohen, a man with a heavy brow, leaned forward, clasping his hands. "It's a compelling narrative, Miss Miller, but it paints a very stark picture. You mention a lack of family support. Is that financial or emotional?" I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. This was the precipice. I could lie, paint a softer picture, pretend everything was fine, or I could own my reality. "Both, sir," I said, my voice steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I am currently estranged from my parents. I am living independently." Mr. Wright raised an eyebrow, glancing at my file. "At 18? That's a significant burden. How do we know this situation won't impact your academic performance? University is stressful enough without housing insecurity." "I understand your concern," I replied, locking eyes with him. I didn't blink. "But you are looking at my transcripts. Those grades were earned while I was managing a household of 4, working 20 hours a week, and dealing with the domestic responsibilities that my parents abdicated. I did that without support. In fact, I did that with active resistance." I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice to a register of absolute conviction. "The instability you see as a risk, that is my training ground. I have been managing chaos my entire life. If you give me this scholarship, if you give me a stable environment where my only job is to learn, I won't just succeed. I will eclipse every expectation you have, because for the first time in my life, I will be working for myself." The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. Dr. Aris looked at Mr. Cohen, then back at me. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "Well," she said softly, "that is certainly a compelling argument." The walk back to the bus stop felt different. The city noise, the sirens, the honking cars, the chatter of pedestrians didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt like a symphony. I had spoken my truth, and the world hadn't ended. The sky was a bruised purple of twilight, and the wind bit at my cheeks, but I felt warm. 2 days later, I was back in the motel room, eating instant noodles from a styrofoam cup. The TV was murmuring in the background. My phone, which I now kept on mostly for email, chimed. Subject: Regents Scholarship Decision. I set the noodles down. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. I tapped the screen, the loading circle spinning for an agonizing eternity. "Dear Miss Miller, it is our distinct pleasure to inform you." The breath left my lungs in a ragged sob. I read it again and again. Full tuition, housing stipend, book allowance. I dropped the phone onto the bed and pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. I didn't scream. I didn't jump up and down. I curled forward, forehead resting on my knees, and wept. Not tears of sadness, but of sheer, exhausting relief. The chains were gone. The theft of my grandmother's legacy didn't matter anymore because I had forged a new one. I wasn't the daughter who was left behind. I wasn't the servant. I was a scholar. I was a person with a future. I wiped my face, sniffing, and picked up the phone again. I navigated to my contacts list. Mom, Dad, Luna. One by one, I selected them. One by one, I pressed block caller. There was no ceremony to it, no dramatic final text, just a quiet digital severing of the final threads. I was homeless, tired, and alone in a cheap motel room, but as I looked out the window at the flickering neon sign, I realized I had never been more at home in my own skin. I had walked through the fire, and I had come out the other side, not as ash, but as gold. The autumn air at the University of Oakhaven smelled distinctively different from the stale, oppressive atmosphere of the house I used to inhabit. Here, the breeze carried the scent of wet cobblestones, decaying maple leaves, and the roasting coffee beans from the student union. It was the scent of possibility. I sat by the window in the fourth-floor quiet zone of the library, the spine of a massive art history textbook pressed against my sternum. Below me, the campus sprawled out like an intricate tapestry of red brick and golden foliage. For the first month, I had walked these paths with my shoulders hunched, waiting for someone to tap me on the back and tell me there had been a mistake, that girls like me, ghosts who were meant to serve and stay silent, didn't belong in hallowed halls like these. But no one did. The silence here wasn't a punishment, it was a sanctuary. Avery, you're doing that thing again. I blinked, turning from the window to see Maya, my roommate, peering over the top of her laptop. Maya was vibrant in every way I had been trained not to be, loud, colorful, and unapologetically space-consuming. She wore a bright mustard sweater that clashed beautifully with her dark skin, and her hair was wrapped in a silk scarf that shimmered under the fluorescent lights. "What thing?" I asked, my voice sounding steadier than it had weeks ago. "The staring into the middle distance like you're expecting a Victorian tragedy thing," Maya teased, though her eyes held a warmth that still unsettled me. She reached across the scarred wooden table and tapped my hand. "We have the critique in an hour. You ready?" I looked down at my sketchbook. "I think so. I'm just nervous about Professor Halloway's reaction to the perspective shift." "He's going to love it. You're the best draftsman in the freshman cohort, Avery. Stop acting like you snuck in through the back door." I forced a smile, but the imposter syndrome was a persistent itch under my skin. "Old habits," I muttered. "Well, break them," she said, closing her laptop with a decisive snap. "Come on, let's get caffeine before we face the firing squad." Walking to the campus cafe, I felt the familiar weight of my phone buzzing in my pocket. My stomach dropped, a visceral, physical reaction that instantly coated my palms in sweat. It had been happening for 3 days. I ignored it, keeping my pace steady beside Maya. "Is that them again?" Maya asked quietly. She knew the broad strokes of my story, the escape, the theft of my trust fund, the years of servitude. She didn't treat me with pity, but with a fierce, protective anger that I was still learning how to accept. "Yeah," I said, the word tight in my throat. "You don't have to answer." "I know." But the buzzing persisted, a rhythmic demand for attention. When we reached the line for coffee, I finally pulled the device out. The screen lit up with the word mother. Not mom, just mother. I stared at the glowing letters. For 18 years, that word had commanded instant obedience. It had meant drop everything. It had meant Luna needs something. It had meant you are invisible until you were useful. "Let me see," Maya whispered, leaning in. I didn't answer the call, but a text message popped up immediately after the ringing stopped. "Where are you? It's been weeks. The house is a disaster. Luna is distressed because she can't manage the scheduling for the charity gala on her own. Stop this childish tantrum and come home. We are willing to discuss an allowance if you return by the weekend." I read the message twice. The air in the cafe seemed to thin. There was no, "we were worried," no, "are you safe," no apology for the stolen money, the years of neglect, or the empty house on my birthday, just a list of inconveniences my absence had caused. To them, I wasn't a missing daughter, I was a broken appliance. "What does it say?" Maya asked, her voice low. I handed her the phone. As she read, her jaw tightened. Oh, absolutely not. Childish tantrum? Allowance? Avery, they robbed you of thousands of dollars and your entire childhood. "She needs help with the gala," I said, a dark, dry laugh bubbling up from my chest. It felt foreign, sharp. Luna can't manage the scheduling. "Luna is 19 years old," Maya scoffed. "She can learn to use a calendar." I looked at the phone, then at the bustling cafe around me. Students were laughing, stressing over exams, arguing about philosophy. They were living their lives. I was building a life here. I had a 4.0 GPA. I had a scholarship that I had clawed out of the earth with my own 2 hands. I had a roommate who knew my coffee order. Oat milk latte, 2 pumps of vanilla, and didn't ask me to clean her dishes. "I'm going to do it," I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a breaking wave. "What do you mean, do it?" "Block them." Maya's eyes widened. "Really? You said you weren't ready." "I wasn't," I said, my thumb hovering over the screen. "But I realized something just now. They aren't calling because they miss me. They're calling because the vacuum cleaner is heavy and the scheduling software is complicated." I tapped the contact settings. My heart hammered against my ribs, a chaotic bird trapped in a cage. This felt like a death. It was a death. The final death of the hope that maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough, they would love me. I scrolled down to the bottom of the screen. Block caller. I pressed it. Then I went to my father's number. Block caller. Then Luna's. Block caller. The silence that followed wasn't on the phone, it was in my head. The constant low-level static of obligation, the worry that I was disappointing them, the fear of their judgment, suddenly cut out. I looked up at Maya, my hands trembling slightly. "It's done." Maya grinned, a wide, brilliant expression. She grabbed my shoulders and gave me a quick shake. "Hell yes, Avery! Welcome to the rest of your life. Now, let me buy you a pastry. You look like you just exorcised a demon." "I think I did," I whispered. The studio critique was held in a high-ceilinged room that smelled of graphite and sawdust. Professor Holloway, a man whose architectural critiques were rumored to make grown men cry, paced in front of my pinned-up drawings. I had designed a community center focused on light. My concept was transparency, creating spaces where no one could be hidden, where every corner was touched by the sun. It was the antithesis of the dark, compartmentalized house I grew up in, where doors were always closed and secrets festered in the shadows. Holloway stopped pacing. He adjusted his glasses, leaning in close to inspect the cross-section of my atrium design. The room was silent. My classmates shifted on their stools. "Miss Bennett," he rumbled. "Yes, sir?" I braced myself for the criticism. I prepared myself to be told it was impractical, too expensive, too fragile. "You have an intuitive understanding of how light impacts psychology," he said, turning to look at me. "Most first-year students are obsessed with the facade, how the building looks to the street. You seem obsessed with how the building feels to the person standing inside it." I blinked, stunned. Yes, I suppose so." "It's a remarkable empathy for the inhabitant," he continued, tapping the drawing. "This isn't just a structure, it's a sanctuary. The structural integrity is sound, the flow is logical, but the emotional intelligence of the design, that is rare." He moved on to the next student, but his words lingered in the air around me. Remarkable empathy, emotional intelligence. For years, my parents had called me sensitive or moody. They had weaponized my ability to feel the room, using my awareness of their moods to make me a better servant. If Dad was angry, I knew to hide the bills. If Mom was stressed, I knew to have tea ready. I had viewed my sensitivity as a weakness, a chink in the armor. Professor Holloway had just reframed it as my greatest strength. After class, a guy from the back row, Leo, I think his name was, caught up to me while I was packing my charcoal sticks. He had messy hair and ink stains on his fingers. "That was intense," Leo said, hitching his bag up on his shoulder. "Holloway never uses the word remarkable. I think he hates my brutalist parking garage." I laughed, surprised by how easy it came out. Maybe he just prefers glass to concrete. Maybe. Leo smiled. It was a genuine, lopsided grin. "Hey, a few of us are going to the rooftop of the dorms tonight, just to hang out, watch the city lights. You should come. Maya is coming." The old Avery would have said no. The old Avery would have had chores to do or would have felt guilty to enjoy leisure time, convinced that she hadn't earned it. The old Avery would have worried she didn't have the right clothes or the right stories to tell. "I have a lot of reading," I started, the automatic excuse rising to my lips. Then I remembered the blocked numbers. I remembered Holloway's praise. I remembered that no one was waiting for me to cook dinner. I zipped up my bag. "Actually, I'd love to." The night air on the roof was brisk, chilling the tips of my ears, but I didn't mind. We sat on mismatched lawn chairs and blankets, 6 or 7 of us, passing around a bag of cheap pretzels and a thermos of hot cider. Below us, the city lights shimmered, a grid of gold and amber stretching out to the horizon. It was beautiful, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I was up here, amidst it. Leo was telling a story about his attempts to cook pasta in a kettle, and the group was roaring at laughter. Maya was leaning against my shoulder, her warmth grounding me. I took a sip of the cider, the spices warming my chest. I looked at these people, strangers a few months ago, now the architects of my new reality. They didn't know about the trust fund. They didn't know about the list of chores. They liked me because I was Avery, because I was funny when I was tired, because I drew beautiful buildings, because I listened when they spoke. A wave of grief washed over me, sudden and sharp, for the little girl I used to be. I grieved for the years she spent waiting for a crumb of affection that was never going to come. I grieved for the birthday spent crying in an empty kitchen. But as the grief receded, it left something stronger in its wake. Clarity. I wasn't a shadow anymore. Shadows disappear when you shine a light on them. I was solid. I was real. "Avery?" Leo asked, noticing my silence. "You good?" I looked at him, then at Maya, then out at the sprawling, infinite lights of the city. I thought about the text message sitting in my blocked folder, the demands of a family who had lost their grip on me. "Yeah," I said, and for the first time in 18 years, I knew it was the absolute truth. "I'm really good." I leaned back, looking up at the stars that were no longer obscured by the ceiling of my parents' house. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, crisp air of independence. It tasted like victory. The mid-morning sun beat down on the university quad, turning the heavy, black polyester of my graduation gown into a personal sauna. Sweat trickled down the small of my back, prickling against my skin, but I didn't shift or complain. I stood perfectly still, letting the heat wrap around me like a blanket. It felt real. It felt tangible. It was a stark difference from the cold, hollow emptiness that had defined the house I grew up in. Around me, the air vibrated with a chaotic symphony of joy. Thousands of people, graduates in their matching regalia, families in their Sunday best, created a hum of conversation that rose into a roar. I could smell the scent of trampled grass, expensive perfume, and the faint metallic tang of hairspray from the girl standing in front of me. "Nervous?" Maya whispered, nudging my arm with her elbow. Her cap was tilting dangerously to the left, a tassel swaying near her eye. I looked at her, my friend who had seen me through late-night study sessions and the terrifying lows of my first year away. "No," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "Maybe heavy, but in a good way, like an anchor finding the seabed." Maya grinned, adjusting her sash. "You're getting philosophical on me again, Avery. Save it for the valedictorian speech." The procession began. The organ music blasted over the loudspeakers, pompous and grand. As we started the slow march toward the stadium seating, my mind inevitably drifted back. It was a reflex I hadn't fully unlearned, checking the periphery for approval that would never come. I scanned the bleachers instinctively, seeing the sea of waving parents, the "We love you" signs, the fathers holding cameras with telephoto lenses. For a heartbeat, the old ache flared, a phantom limb pain where my family used to be. I imagined my mother's critical eyes scanning my hair, my father checking his watch, bored by my achievement. I imagined Luna complaining about the heat, demanding they leave early to get lunch. Then the image shattered. They weren't here. I had blocked the numbers, I had returned the unopened letters that arrived during my sophomore year, feeble, guilt-tripping attempts to reconnect once they realized their ATM was gone for good. They were hundreds of miles away, likely miserable in their debt-ridden luxury, while I was here. I was here. We filed into the rows, the plastic seats baking in the sun. As I sat, I smoothed the fabric of my gown over my knees. I thought about the trust fund, grandmother's legacy. My parents had viewed it as a bottomless well for Luna's whims, stealing dollar after dollar until nothing remained but the dust of their greed. They had stolen the easy path. They had stolen the safety net. But as I looked at my hands, calloused from the part-time job I worked at the library, stained with ink from finals week, I realized they hadn't stolen this. They couldn't steal the sleepless nights I'd spent writing essays to keep my scholarship. They couldn't steal the 4.0 GPA. They couldn't embezzle the resilience I had forged in the fires of their neglect. "College of Arts and Sciences," the dean bellowed from the podium, his voice booming across the field. A roar went up from our section. The ceremony was a blur of names, a rhythmic chanting of identities being acknowledged one by one. I waited, my heart hammering a steady rhythm against my ribs. "Avery Elise Thorne." Hearing my name amplified over the speakers felt like a physical strike to the chest. It wasn't whispered in a demand for coffee. It wasn't screamed in frustration. It was spoken with reverence. I stood up. My legs felt strong. I walked to the stage, the ground firm beneath my heels. As I climbed the stairs, the world seemed to narrow down to the dean's outstretched hand and the diploma he held. "Congratulations, Avery," he said, his smile practiced but kind. "Thank you," I replied. My voice didn't shake. I took the diploma, the faux leather folder that represented 4 years of fighting for my life, and I looked out at the crowd. Thousands of faces, a blur of color. I wasn't looking for my parents anymore. I was looking for the one person who had told me the truth. And there she was, standing in the aisle about 20 rows back, ignoring the ushers asking people to sit, was Aunt Saris. She was wearing a bright, violently orange sundress that clashed with everything, waving a program over her head like a maniac. She looked ridiculous. She looked beautiful. I walked off the stage, clutching the diploma so hard my knuckles turned white. The walk back to my seat felt like floating. The rest of the ceremony was noise, a backdrop to the quiet clarity settling in my soul. When the caps were finally thrown, a chaotic cloud of mortarboards blotting out the sun, I navigated through the crushing mob toward the exit gate where we had agreed to meet. The humidity was suffocating now, but I took a deep breath, savoring it. Avery! Saris broke through the crowd, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hand that looked like she'd picked them from the side of the highway on her way here. She didn't offer a handshake. She pulled me into a hug that squeezed the breath out of me, smelling of peppermint tea and old books. "You did it," she whispered into my ear, her voice thick. "You actually did it." I pulled back, blinking away the sudden stinging in my eyes. "I did." Sarah's held me at arm's length, her sharp eyes scanning my face. She wasn't looking for the graduate, she was looking for the niece she had saved with a single conversation 4 years ago. "They aren't here," she said, stating it as a fact, not a question. She knew I needed to hear it out loud. "No," I said, shaking my head. "They aren't." "Does it hurt?" Saris asked. Saris never danced around the truth. I looked down at the diploma in my hand, then back up at the vibrant chaos of the campus. I thought about the silence of the house on my 18th birthday. I thought about the list of chores left on the counter. Then I looked at Maya, who was laughing with her parents a few yards away, waving at me. I looked at Saris, who had driven 6 hours just to see me walk across a stage for 10 seconds. "No," I said, and the realization washed over me with the force of a breaking wave. "It doesn't hurt. It feels clean, like a wound that's finally scar tissue." Saris nodded, her expression softening. She handed me the wildflowers. "Your grandmother would have been so proud, Avery, not just of the grades, but of the backbone." "She left me a legacy," I said quietly, the words forming as I spoke them. "My parents took the money, but the money wasn't the legacy, was it? The legacy was the opportunity, and when they took that, I had to make my own." "You built a skyscraper out of rubble, kid," Sarah said, wiping a smudge of lipstick from her teeth. "So what now? You have the degree, you have the job offer in the city, you have the freedom." I looked toward the horizon, beyond the campus gates. For the first time in my life, the future wasn't a terrifying void or a set of obligations dictated by someone else. It was a blank canvas, white and pristine. "Now," I said, adjusting the cap on my head, "I go have lunch. And then I live. I just live." Saris laughed, a bright, barking sound that made a passing family jump. "Lunch sounds like a good start. I'm buying. And none of that budget menu nonsense you're used to. We're getting dessert." "Deal," I smiled. As we walked away from the stadium, leaving the noise and the ceremony behind, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The shadow that had trailed me for 18 years, the shadow of Luna, of my parents, of the girl who was told she was nothing more than a utility, had dissolved in the noon sun. I checked my pocket. My phone was there, silent. No missed calls from numbers I didn't want to see. Just a text from Maya. "Drinks tonight to celebrate the genius?" I typed back, "Absolutely." The shadow's inheritance wasn't what was left to me in a will. It was what I had found in the dark when everything else was stripped away. I was Avery Elise Thorne. I was a daughter of no one but myself. And as I stepped off the curb and into the rest of my life, I realized that was the richest legacy of all.